listening to the Bourbon Nerdz podcast, a Bourbon Nerdz Distillery exclusive featuring Robert Likarish with the Ironroot Republic Distillery. I'm Cody.
I'm Garrett.
And we are the Bourbon Nerdz. Hey, Robert, how you doing?
How's it going, man?
It's going great. We're really excited that you took the time to interview with us today. So, Garrett, you got any... how you doing today, too?
I'm good. We got some bourbon in front of us. I'm really excited to drink and try some of this and talk about whiskey. It's one of our favorite things to talk about. So
I agree. Yeah. So we're sitting here in the Ironroot Distillery in Denison, Texas, with Robert Likarish, who's owner, right? Owner, founder.
Oh yeah.
All the above.
Taster,
yeah. Making some of the best whiskey in the world. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and kick it off. What did you think about the Super Bowl last night? Kind of coming to you after.
About halftime, I was like, hey, and I don't know if I need to see anymore.
I think it was over after that Devontae Smith touchdown.
Yeah, it was like the Alamo or something. He just got slaughtered. I don't know. It is what it is. So congrats to the Eagles for winning and Jalen Hurts for getting his. He played at OU, but yeah.
Did you partake in any drinks and foods and?
I did some wings during the first half, and then had a couple beers and then a whiskey after it was all said and done. So
yeah, I had a good cigar and a whiskey out by the fire outside. That was really a cool little setup.
Yeah, no, we had a good time. We had a ton of dips and foods, and then my buddy Brian made tacos. We had barbacoa and some pulled pork.
There we go.
Yeah, so it was pretty good. It hit the spot. I think I gained 20 pounds, but
yeah, it feels like it when you wake up.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Heartburn and bloating.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's dive in. We've got a lot to talk about today. Again, thank you for taking time to be on our podcast. We're big fans of the whiskey that you're making. What you have going on here. We did your tour, what was it, about 6 months ago?
It was for my birthday last year.
Last year, yeah. Yep. So we had a great time. You guys put on a great tour, and you're making some amazing whiskey. So
thanks, man.
You're welcome.
I try.
Some accolades that started off. So tell us about your bourbon story. I know you have a really awesome bourbon story, and we wanted to share that with our audience today.
So the origins of making bourbon here. So I guess it kind of goes back to. Obviously, Ironroot, we're a small family distillery. It's, my brother and myself technically started it, but really mom's the one who's in charge. So if you ever up at the distillery, she walks around and you can tell where mom's at any time.
For sure.
So
yeah, she's the boss.
She's a very commanding presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, she makes sure this place runs. And that's, again, a testament for her getting my brother and myself to work together is pretty impressive at the end of the day. But yeah, no. So our bourbon story is kind of crazy because growing up, there wasn't a lot of alcohol in the house. I remember my parents drinking wine before, for Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas. And then I always give my dad a hard time because the only other time I really remember him drinking was when we would go to the beach because grew up elementary school I was in Corpus Christi. So
okay,
Padres,
yeah, nice area.
Port Aransas wasn't too far. But we'd go and he would get a little cooler and he'd put in Zima and Tequila in there. And that's what he would drink. And those are my only memories of him really drinking growing up. But my parents, they actually got into drinking after I left for college. So that was really surprising. My brother and myself would come back and my parents were like, hey, you want to go to a wine tasting? And we're like, heck yeah, we do. Yeah,
sign me up.
Let's go alcohol. And then, I'm 20 years old. Yeah, let's go do this thing. So I remember going and at the wine tasting, the guy that was in charge of it actually took my dad aside and had my brother and myself come with him. And he just started pulling out bottles like cognac and Armagnac. And I was like, what the heck are these things? And just fell in love with spirits through that kind of experience. And my brother and I, we started joking that, when we retired, we should do something together, whether that was a small brewery or maybe a winery. And as we started drinking spirits, it was some of those things that we kept bonding over drinking spirits, whether that be whiskey or bourbon, different scotches, different cognacs, different Armagnacs. And you fast forward a few years, we had a family reunion in Spokane, Washington. And so we went there and went to this little tiny Thai food restaurant. It was in the shopping mall. And I remember as we were walking out from having this lunch at this Thai food place that we were looking around and in this same shopping center, this little distillery had just popped up. We're like,
in a shopping center.
Yeah, it was in a shopping center.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
I was like, what in the world? Because I've been to breweries, I've been to wineries, but never been to a distillery before. So we were like, hey, let's go check it out. So we wander in there and just kind of immediately found love. You walk in, they had these really beautiful German stills. This place is called Dry Fly Distilling. They're still around to this day. And they had beautiful German stills and because really shiny copper on there. And my father, he's always been in the copper industry. We always joke with him. Him and my mom grew up in Butte, Montana. It's a mining town. So we always joke that they actually have copper in their blood because that's what they mined in Butte, Montana. And so like we saw that and it just was so beautiful and really stuck with us. And we were having fun tasting the spirits. My dad turned to my brother and myself. He's like, you know what, guys, forget the winery, forget the brewery when you retire. This is what you should do. Heck yeah, that sounds like fun. All right, cool. And fast forward a few more years, kind of in the background of your brain. I was getting ready to graduate from college, and then from law school. And I was like, you know what? I do not want to be a lawyer. Like, I cannot stand doing this. And so I decided to tell my parents that I was going to graduate in May, but I was not going to be a lawyer. And the best time to do that was at Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
That's the time of least resistance.
Are you guys sitting down? Do y'all have some cocktails? I got some big news to share with you.
Surprise. I don't want to be a lawyer. And so I just remember my mom's eyes got super big. She started chugging her wine, I'm pretty sure. My dad then, to break the silence at the table, was like, well, what are you going to do then, Robert? More silence. And he's like, you going to start that distillery? Because I had no idea what I was going to do. And I was like, you know what? I'm young. I'm dumb right now. I personally didn't have any kids. I was like, I can eat ramen noodles every night if I need to. Whiskey takes a long time to make. So why do I want to wait till I retire? Why not? I'm going to do something this dumb. Let's do it now. So I was like, you know what, Dad? Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And before I knew it, my brother's like, well, right, if you're doing it, I guess I'm in too.
Sign me up.
And he looked over his wife, and his wife was like, you should have asked me before you said that. Her statement was like, you guys can do this, but if you're doing it, we're going back to Texas to start a distillery, which Jonathan and I, we grew up, he was actually born in El Paso. We grew up most of our lives in Texas.
Yeah, I'm sure aging whiskey in Montana would take a little bit longer.
It'd be quite a bit slower, that's for sure. I think that they have definitely proven that over the years. So that's kind of started us on this crazy journey. That last semester of law school, I spent kind of studying on how to make whiskey, I got my hands on all sorts of moonshining books and stuff, because there really wasn't a lot of I would say study material on making whiskey at the time.
No way making whiskey for dummies books.
No, it did not exist. So got my hands on some Scottish textbooks, but other than that, there really wasn't a lot. But that spring break, Mom and I kicked off over to Kentucky to go on the tour. We were driving through and we stopped in Indiana over at Starlight before we did the tour.
They do some cool stuff.
They make some good stuff.
And they weren't even making bourbon at that point. They had this little tiny still. They were only making brandy. But Ted, the owner of Starlight, he actually was the president of the ADI, the American Distilling Institute. So we're like, hey, well, let's stop in and say hi to him. So we stopped in and he took us aside and was like, all right, guys, so you're wanting to start a distillery. Why are you going to all the big Kentucky distilleries? You're not going to do that. You're not going to build that. You need to go visit all the small distilleries. So we ended up changing a lot of our plans. We did stay one day in Louisville, which ended up being super important for us because we ended up going to Vendome that day and checking it out. And my mom accidentally putting our name on the list to get a still, which I had no idea about. And that came back to be a giant benefit years later. But, so we did that and then went and toured a bunch of distilleries. And then I was like, you know what? I think we can do this. I think we can pull it off. But I sure as heck don't know really how to make whiskey. I mean, I know the principles of it, but haven't really done it. Before we get this, I need to do a lot more study. I need to go work places. I need to go intern at places. And, that's what we did. We went and we kind of toured all around the country, interned at a bunch of different distilleries, started talking with a bunch of different people, but ultimately ended up in the presence of Hubert Germain Rabon. He's a master cognac distiller that moved out to California, got in with his apprentice, Nancy Fraley. And as
name drop.
The rest is kind of history on that. So Nancy had just kind of left Hubert and had started working on her own a little bit. And that's kind of when I first met her and got to know her. So it was a fun few years of really learning a lot of French distilling, French techniques. And my brother and I really fell in love with that style because of how specific they are with everything, with how intentional they are with every time they do something. It's very much for a reason. And it's kind of really stuck out and really helped us develop our own style here in Texas for sure.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I think you can tell by that you're not just the bourbon. You guys are making finished whiskey. You're making rye. I mean, you already have a very diverse product line for being, just 10 years you guys hit last year. So I think that's pretty amazing.
Congrats, by the way. That's a huge accomplishment to make it that far. I'm sure there's times where you're early on like, man, is this really going to work?
Oh, there were more than enough of those times for sure.
So it's a really huge accomplishment. We talk about the corn a little bit, how you got decided on what kind of corns and stuff that you wanted to use.
So that's a really great. So when my brother and I started looking at wanting, making whiskey in Texas, and we were leaving New Bear and coming back to Texas to start the distillery, we started looking at, how we were going to make whiskey in Texas. Post Prohibition, there wasn't any history of making whiskey in Texas up until kind of this revolution. I think the first Texas whiskeys came out in 2008, post Prohibition. That was Garrison Brothers Bourbon and Balcones with their Baby Blue. And those two whiskeys are made in two really different ways. They're two drastically different styles of whiskey.
Yeah, 9 day.
Yeah. And so we started looking at it and we're like, okay, well, there's not like a way people are making whiskey in Texas. There's not like a thing. There's not like Kentucky bourbon. It's not Scotch, like single malt Scotch. So we started looking at this. And when we were talking to Bear about where should we even start with this? Like looking at where, what we should even make when it came to the whiskey side. I'll never forget the advice he gave us. Was probably the most French thing he could have told us at the time, but it was, he was like, boys, just stick with the terroir and you'll be fine. The term terroir, what it means is flavor of the land. So essentially he told us, just make it taste like Texas and you'll be fine, which is really bold statement. I mean, very, very big place, but how do you really capture the flavor of a place? And so that was what Jonathan and I are like, okay, if we're going to make bourbon, how do we make bourbon, but make it distinctively ours and not just like a cheap knockoff of Kentucky bourbon? Because to be quite honest, they already do a really amazing job of that. They don't need me trying to copy what they're doing. So we started looking at it, and one of the things my brother, he really wanted to put kind of his own thumbprint on each kind of stage of production. And obviously that really starts out with the mash bill, with what you're going to be using to make the whiskey. And we knew we grew a bunch of corn here in Grayson County here locally. But when we started looking at, well, okay, we've got that to make bourbon, but that flavoring grain, what the heck are we going to use? Because we don't really grow rye down here.
Yeah.
Don't grow a bunch of wheat. So it was like, what can we really use? And that's when my brother went back and started looking at kind of the historic records for the county. And we started getting back like in 1970s, 60s, 50s, that time period. We started noticing the names of the corn started changing, and they were actually quite a bit different. We saw things like brown corns and red corns popping up. And we're like, brown corn and red corn. Like I'd never heard of brown corn before. I had no idea that there's tens of thousands of different species of corn. And the corn comes in every color of the rainbow. There's rainbow colored corns that, which are nuts and really fun to play with. But my brother started looking at these and he was like, you know what? The blue corn stuff from Balcones is really different, really strange, like flavor wise compared to yellow corn. I wonder if these different corns really have different flavors. And that kind of gave us the idea like, hey, let's start testing these out and see, do they have different flavors? And if they do, what are they? And then can we use it? So we started out just testing out these different corns. And to this day, we've distilled over 65 different species. We try to grow or test out new ones every year. But we're always playing around with it because you never know what you're going to find. We found things that are spicy, things that are fruity, things that are sweet, corns that are herbal. And they're all over the place, which is just super fun to see what corn is going to do.
Do you have a consistent mash bill, or do you kind of change it up depending on what corn you're using and stuff?
So we have 4 core mash bills that we do, okay. I would say. So they're going to be our kind of primary production. Each kind of 3 of them are going to highlight different heirloom corns.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be looking at that as kind of the flavoring grain for those. Now, based on yield that year, kind of how the corn is that year, we may adjust that mash bill a bit. I mean, there's some years we may be using 5%, some years we may be using up to 30% of that particular corn. Or we might do a variety of different ones within that particular realm, but we do play around with it. A lot of it is more to give us maximum flexibility when it comes to the blending table. We want to make sure we can get exactly what we're looking for, or at least give us the best opportunity to get what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So you'll see kind of a little variety within each of those particular, what I call mash bills or the Bloody Butcher corn mash bill, the purple corn, the Flint corn. Each one of those will have slight variations that we'll do even within a year, just to give us more flexibility.
Do you have a favorite corn of all those?
Ooh, my favorite's probably the purple corn.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
It is crazy how many different varieties of corn. Like, I remember when I did your guys' tour, I think I learned more about corn than I've ever learned. To me, it's like, there's yellow corn. I knew there was some varieties, but I didn't know there was like 10,000 different species of corn.
There are some places up there, they'll just, get corn from wherever, and like, actually putting, a lot of thought and, all these different corns. It's just, that's really cool and really different from a lot of places.
Yeah. What would you consider is the most important part of making bourbon? And I know that's probably a very convoluted or complex question, but I'm curious from your perspective.
I guess to me, it's always going to be intentionality. I think it's going to be important for any spirit. Bourbon for sure is going to be very important. Looking at and making choices for that final product based on, again, choosing that yeast for very specific reasons, not just for alcohol production, but what esters are you going to produce? Are you going to use a blend of different yeasts? What fruit profiles are you looking for? Looking at your barrels. I think having to be very intentional about your size of your barrels, the chars that you're using, toast profiles, the oak choices, all those in order to ultimately get to a very specific flavor. If you're not very intentional with what you're using, you're never going to end up with the result that you're looking for. It can be chaotic if you just start scattershotting things. You'll have a lot of different things, which sometimes when you get too excited, sometimes that can happen.
Yeah, I'm sure the testing phase is interesting.
Oh God, you got to throw a lot of things against the wall. But once you get in there, and then even just as you learn what each of these things do, and as you make changes, what that does. If you're letting the fermentation go to 7 days versus 5 days, if you're letting the fermentation temperature get up a little bit higher, what are you going to accomplish? You have to be very intentional with all those choices that you make. Otherwise, again, you'll never be able to be consistent, but also you'll never be able to ultimately achieve what you're really looking for.
So, kind of going back to the barrels and stuff, there's a lot of conversations in the bourbon industry right now about using new oak barrels and not being able to reuse them. And I think that's why some of these places like Brown-Forman and MGP are having to, lay off people or stuff. Do you guys have, or do you have any kind of input on how you feel the state of bourbon is and how you think that maybe something could be changed to where it's not so specific on the barrel? Or I don't know if that's a very clear question, but
yeah, I mean, starting out with the choice of using new oak. Now, don't get me wrong, I love using used barrels. Again, we have a bunch of corn whiskeys we do. I love doing a little single malt here and there with it. There's a lot of flexibility when it comes to used barrels. In fact, a lot of French maturation really relies historically on being able to move from newer into older barrels as you're tasting and seeing how much oak has that spirit have, how much influence is that being. So, I mean, I think flexibility on there would be really interesting for us because we could be more... Okay, once you've gotten enough oak on this end, we could drop you into more used barrel to allow you to continue aging, but not necessarily pile more oak onto it.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, I don't see that rule being changed or addressed, to be quite honest with you. And one of the biggest reasons is that the biggest bourbon producers, most of those companies also own Scotch distilleries and tequilas and Canadian whiskeys and Japanese whiskeys, all of which rely pretty heavily on a flow of used bourbon barrels going to them. Mm. And so if you end up keeping those barrels in the United States, what happens? There's a trickle effect for all their other companies. So on that end, I don't see that rule ever changing. I think when it comes to especially looking at your kind of the Midwest or even cooler climates, new oak is really important for achieving kind of more of the traditional bourbon profile. I mean, again, we can taste our pure used cask product, the Hubris, the corn whiskey, and it is quite a bit different. Even though some of the mash bills, exact same mash bill, exact same fermentate, all that, it does change the nature of the spirit and what the spirit focuses on. You get it, and to me, when it came to the big guys, the big bourbon producers, they would lose a lot of what makes their bourbon that flavor, that taste. And so if you change that, you're going to lose quite a bit of that.
Well, no, it's not necessarily changing. If you could just like make it a little more lenient to where you're not having to spend so much on new oak barrels.
But I think too, to that point, I think you have the big boys that they're already doing it. So, and they're using the barrels for other products like he was mentioning. So you eliminate competition by that. So you've got to get everybody on board with trying to changing that law. So, I mean, I don't know. I think I kind of agree with you. I think it's going to be very difficult for that to change.
It's just an interesting discussion because I've seen that come up recently.
Yeah. I love flexibility. I mean, again, that would create all sorts of really fun opportunities for sure. Mm-hmm. What I will say though, as far as the state of the market in regards to that, there's enough barrel production to accomplish market demand, to be quite on the new oak side. I think a lot of where you saw some of the shortages in the most recent years, some of that's been kind of figured out. I think you had Brown-Forman sell off their cooperage to Independent Stave because Independent Stave is incredibly more efficient without the use of oak and how they make barrels. But you look at just the number of major producers that have opened up that aren't even like major brands, just startups to create sourced whiskey, essentially. It's the amount of increased production just because of that. It's been pretty crazy. Same thing with the major bourbon producers. Like you're talking, Buffalo Trace $1 billion expansion on their production. Not that Lord knows that we could all use a little bit more of that in our lives, but but I think where you've seen the production now, they have a capacity to meet demand as far as where we're going in the next few years. Which again, my big hope as a bourbon consumer and bourbon lover is that will help bring prices back down to a little bit more reasonable level. We have more availability, a little bit more reasonable pricing. Yeah. It would all make us a little bit happier in the community, I think.
Yeah, because the pricing is kind of affecting like places like Kentucky Owl and those kind of that came out with like high prices. And I feel like prices are starting to come down a little bit, and people are starting to be like, we're not going to pay those high prices anymore for those things.
Yeah, you've seen the secondary market cool off a little bit, but I think there's still room to relax. I mean, there's a dream being able to go to this store one day and be able to buy an E.H. Taylor barrel proof or something like that. You know what I mean? Of some of the more tater bottles.
That would be nice.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about some of the offerings that you guys have?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, can we take a quick break and talk about the 3 whiskeys we have in front of us?
Yeah. So I decided to pull a bottle from each of kind of the lines that we do. We have starting out with the sleight of hand. That's going to be a blended line. That we started releasing just this year. We didn't really start doing blending of outside spirit until like 2020. But those are very specific lines that we do that in. So we've got sleight of hand. It's meant to be an easy daily drinker. It's a 92 proof bourbon. It's going to be softer, a little sweeter. It's got a little oomph at 92, but nothing too crazy.
It's definitely drink a little hot, but not hot. It's drinking a little higher, and the flavors are popping a lot more than your typical like 92 proof bourbon. So it's really good.
Yeah, and so that's a blend of some of our pot still bourbon we distill on site. It's got some Kentucky bourbon in there, a little bit of stuff from Indiana as well.
You can definitely taste that pot still, if you're familiar with pot still bourbon. So, but it's good. It's very smooth. It's well balanced.
Yeah, I think giving it body, giving that sweetness, I think that's really what we're going for. That guy making something that's really accessible for everybody and is really reasonably priced. That's the other thing, having a more reasonably priced option.
Sure.
Yeah.
Amen on that.
The second one that we're going to jump in on is going to be one of the Saints Alley lines. So Saints Alley is a product that's available kind of nationwide. If you go have a Total Wine near you, you could probably find it. It's also going to be a base blend, so it's going to have some of our pot still, some column still blended in. We then take and additionally age in finishing casks. So when we started playing around with finishing, this is kind of where that whole line started really fun. The port and cognac's the one I've got right here. We use some tawny port cask. We use a little bit of white port in there as well. And then it's got the cognac cask, which very persnickety with the cognac casks that we use. They're all like 25 years old plus.
Oh, wow.
Got some really fun.
Do you have if you're going to drink finished whiskey or bourbon, do you have a preference? Is cognac your favorite, or do you have
cognac,
a favorite?
Armagnac on the bourbon side tend to be my favorites. Okay. I'm a brandy guy by nature, so that tends to be where I lean. Also with those, even if you go with I would say a heavier or more robust finish on it, it doesn't tend to overwhelm the bourbon quite as much. Whereas port and sherry, if you leave stuff in there for too long, then the whiskey becomes, to me, overly dominated and becomes more of drinking 100 proof port rather than drinking 100 proof bourbon.
Yeah.
So for us, and don't get me wrong, on my Scotch side, I definitely love me a sherry bomb here and there.
Yeah.
But when it came to the bourbon, we wanted to make sure the bourbon still was the center part of what was going on with it. So for us, we tend to do, you're never going to see like a sherry bomb or a port bomb on this particular line because that's not really what we're going for with it.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think you guys have done a really good job blending. So this last bottle, this is the one I instantly fell in love with. So I came up here with a good friend of our, Jamie Summit, who owns a whiskey bar in Durant. And he's like, oh, I'm going to get it. And I was like, man, I spent too much money today. I'm not. And then your dad was out there and let me try it. And I was like, what is this, 110, 115? He's like, oh, no, this is our I-Core. It's a 140. And I don't know if you remember because you were busy helping some other customers. My eyes got about this big. You can't see us on the podcast, but I've instantly fallen in love with this. This is my favorite bottle that you guys make. Just drinking these others, they're all very good, but this just... it speaks to my love language.
It'll be interesting to do that with that Someone Say Whiskey Pick because that one's really just excited. Like a creme brulee bomb. It's insane. Like
big caramel bomb on that guy.
Yeah, 139 proof. Man, you gotta watch out because that one will these higher ones will sneak up on you real quick.
Oh, yeah. And this one, just like the Harbinger single barrels or Promethean, those are all 100% on-site produced. It's all pure pot still spirit on those. So it's really fun because you get a lot of depth and a lot of kind of cool, crazy stuff going on with those bottles.
Get a lot of good, strong flavors. What are some of the other offerings that you guys have?
So, I mean, on the pure pot still line, the two core items, we have Promethean, which can be the 100 proof. Use a little bit more of the Flint corn in the mash bill. It's going to have a little bit more spice, a little kind of darker chocolate, really kind of fun at the 100 proof line. And then you have Harbinger 115, probably the whiskey we're most well known for. That's our, it's again, more bloody butcher corn in the blend for that particular bourbon. Again, 115 proof, obviously with the name. But that's our guy that's uses quite a bit of European oak in the blend, which I really, really love. And that's kind of the one that we try to get out the most kind of nationwide the best we can. It's a blend of 3 to 5 year old bourbons. So, not super old. Again, that's why we call it Harbinger. It's foreshadowing of other things to come, but it's a really, really fun bottle.
I feel like things age a little faster in the Texas area, though.
100%. I would say it's a when people ask me that question, like, do things really age faster in Texas? That's a really hard question to answer because with the higher heat, more intense, temperature shifts, obviously you're forcing whiskey in and out of that oak at a faster rate than you are in cooler climates.
Yeah.
And so on that part of the maturation process, you are introducing oak in a heavier amount in a much earlier age than you would in cooler, calmer climates, obviously. On the back end of that, there's certain chemical reactions, certain ester reactions that occur at a faster rate when you have heat. And when you have more heat, they occur more and at a faster rate. So on that aspect, those particular things can be increased to a certain level or are sped up to a certain level. But on the flip side, there are certain reactions that are slowed down by excessive heat. So there's certain aging things that are going to be happening in Kentucky faster than they happen here. Also, when you look at some of the breakdowns on the oak, if you just keep piling oak on oak on oak on oak, you don't give it the time to properly break down and soften and do kind of all the things that you'd want it to do. So you have to be really careful with how you use the weather here. So if you were to really twist my arm, I'd say we can hit a young but mature spirit at an earlier age than you would in cooler climates. But that doesn't really tell the whole story, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense.
And you guys had a anniversary last year, 10th anniversary, which we already talked about a little bit. You released the Harbinger cigar blend. Is that a little bit older?
So the cigar blend, we released that earlier in the year. So that was a little bit older bourbons. That was a blend of 5 to 8 year old bourbon in that particular Harbinger release. And then we had a 10-year-old bourbon we did at the anniversary party. And then we have obviously I-Core that's going to be that kind of 6 to 8 year old kind of range.
Which is lovely.
Most of them are about 7.5.
Yeah. So I saw you guys had a new bottling line and you guys are expanding a little bit, correct?
Yeah, we actually moved the bottling line. It was up here in the main building. It got its own building, so we just moved it back there, and it just got operational like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
So we're catching up right now.
I saw that video. It looked like really efficient. So I think that should help a lot on efficiency. And
oh yeah, that's a testament to Jeff, who's our maintenance manager here, and then my brother Jonathan. Both of them are responsible for making things run. But Jeff, that bottom line would not be operational if it wasn't for him. So shout out to Jeff on that one.
So what's the plans for expansion? Or can you talk about that? Or
yeah, so we've got hopefully sometime the end of this month, beginning of next month, we'll have the new barrel warehouse will be open. It'll store another 5,000-ish barrels. So
is that all?
Yeah, that's it. So that's the next big thing for us. And then later this summer, early fall, we're supposed to be getting our new pot still in. So we'll be having a big brother to our current still. We have a 1,200 gallon still right now on the pot still side. And we're bringing in another 2,000 gallons still to kind of pair up with it.
Wow,
so
nice. That's amazing.
Yeah, so we should be able to produce a lot more whiskey here pretty soon.
Good.
Is there any kind of finish that you haven't released but maybe you want to try, like any like honey cask finish or anything like that?
Ooh, that's a good question. Haven't done any honey or played around a whole lot with any of the honey. There's a couple like more esoteric products. I would say there's a fortified French wine that's really good that I'm excited about. There is, I know I was talking about sherry earlier. There is some sherry that we've had some bourbon in for a very long time that's going to get associated with, or blended into a couple different products coming forward. But
that sounds exciting.
The sherry casks are really, really fun.
I know that rum, I've seen some really, really interesting rum finishing lately. Like I saw one in rye finishing like a rum barrel and or rye. Do you have any sorry, I can't talk. Do you have any blended ryes or anything? Or
oh heck yeah! So now you
because I haven't got to try any of your ryes stuff.
So I've got 2 ryes. We have one that's the sleight of hand rye, so it's kind of the brother to the bourbon we just tried. And then I've got Nobleman, which is the Saints Alley rye that's aged in Tokai wine casks. And that's one that won Best Rye this last year.
I like the Penelope Tokai cask one too.
Well, then I guess we got to dive into a couple of ryes here.
Yeah, for sure.
Why don't you share, or do you have one? I mean, it's a hard question. What's your favorite bottle that you guys produce?
Oh, God.
I know that's a tough question. you know mine. I just spilled the beans on the iCore. I can't get away from that one.
Tends to be more seasonal with me, to be quite honest with you. It's generally like, what did we just finish blending and putting out? Because that's the new baby that I'm like super excited about.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, Nobleman is one of my favorite ones that we do. iCore is always something that like I try to hold on to, although
I don't blame you.
It's such a fun blend. But I'd say generally it's gonna be that Harold. The Armagnac finishes tend to be really fun. But as far as like special releases on site outside of iCore, I'd probably say the Apotheosis. I love different finished whiskeys or playing around with finishes, so that tends to be something that I'm most excited about every year.
Yeah, this sounds really nice. 107 is a good proof.
Yeah, that's a good sweet spot.
Bottles.
Yeah, man. It's crazy. You guys have done it's crazy how I know I hate to keep bragging on you guys, but you guys are literally, you're a young distillery and you're blending, like your master blenders. Like when I look at in the current market with Rise, Sagamore is one of my favorites. And I don't know if you're a fan, but
love those guys. Went and visited them last year.
Masterclass of blenders, man. There's some of their sherry casks and things that they do.
Fun.
I got the Specs drop this year. I got one of their Specs picks, and I think that's one of the best bottles I got out of the Specs drop. So, if you're sleeping on Sagamore or Ironroot, definitely, give them a try and, be in the leader. So this is going to be a controversial question, but who do you guys consider your biggest competitor in the Texas market?
Oh man, there's a lot of really good Texas distilleries. I would say when you start talking about competitors, so one, people that like put out the same style of spirit, I guess would be the kind of the I'd say if you want to talk competitor. So I mean, I think you've got a couple really different styles of bourbon that tend to stand out to me as far as like bigger Texas. So I mean, obviously, when it comes to more traditional style of bourbon, I'd say still Austin's probably the one that does that the best in the state. They do a lot of really cool, really kind of fun special releases. Again, Nancy's one of my mentors is the blender over there, so I got to give her a shout out. They do some really cool, really fun, again, very traditional stuff compared to us or some of the other folk. I think you have to give shout out to Dan Garrison starting it all. The Balmoral is a really fun whiskey that they put out every year. They've done a lot with honey barrels and honey whiskey on that side.
Yeah, the honeydew they have is pretty popular.
So yeah, I'd say that they're probably the two biggest ones that stand out in my mind on that end. But there's a lot of really wonderful Texas to like Andalusia down in Blanco. Amazing job that they do down there. Make some Irish pot still style whiskeys. Obviously you got Balcones on the single malt side that does some really cool, really interesting things. They've got some crazy experiments in their place that are really, really fun. You've got, a bunch of people like Milam Green does a really great job on the blending side as well. They do some cool blends, some cool finishes.
And they just won a pretty big prestigious award.
Yeah. They, as I said, Texas is not lacking of like really talented distillers and really talented blenders, and so it's fun to be part of the community here because we all give each other ideas, we all razz each other, have a good time, but it is still really communal, which is really fun. Yeah,
which I think again another question: what do you love about bourbon? Like, why do you love bourbon?
I mean, one, it tastes really good, so that doesn't hurt. But I mean, I think it's always, at the end of the day, it's always about community. I think anything that people can sit down, hang out with, and you have all the other noise out there in the world that we all deal with on a daily basis, and getting to sit down, hang out with people, talk, BS, have fun. Like when you sit down and you open up a bottle and share it with friends, it just relaxes everybody, kind of like shoulders, kind of, you can see that tension release a little bit, and you can sit down, enjoy good food, hang out, and it makes you kind of stop and smell the roses a little bit. And I think that's always my favorite part of what community brings and what community brings to people.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think that's where we want our brand, our image to be about the bourbon community, be about bringing people together. Your story that you started with on your bourbon journey, it brought your family together. It was something that you shared and you have those memories. That's what sparked your passion and your drive to make this a dream come true, right? This is what you're doing. And not only are you doing it, you're doing it at a high level. And I think, you should be very proud. Your brother should be proud of what you guys have made. And I appreciate you meeting with us today and, continuing to share some of the whiskey that I think everyone needs to try. And I'm hoping that you continue to make whiskey for a long time because you're doing some great stuff.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I bet having the law degree really helps in this business too.
Garrett, you have no idea. Being able to read government regulation, especially when they change government regulations, and be able to understand, okay, well, this is what the law says, but there also might be ways that this can be interpreted. So you might have to look at some of the commentary on some of those laws to understand how it's truly interpreted. You get into labeling laws and all sorts of fun stuff on that end. It is a complicated mess, and definitely I do not regret going to law school. Has been very helpful in my life, but yeah.
It's like you don't want to be a lawyer, but at the same time, it is good to have that information and knowledge for sure.
I'm sure that's come up and played dividends for you. And we talked about Hochatown, which we released part one of the interview. They talked a lot about the legislation and having to work.
Yeah, he's fighting some battles right now with Oklahoma because it's still pretty new. Oklahoma, they've been open for 10 years, but they're really one of the only distilleries.
Yeah, they're kind of pioneering the whole Oklahoma whiskey and bourbon and all that stuff. So it's pretty interesting. So let's talk about some of your non-Ironroot favorite go-tos. I'm curious to see when you're not drinking Ironroot products, which I'm sure you do occasionally.
I see a case back here with some Stag.
Yeah,
Russell's. There's some good stuff back there.
So what's some of your favorite go-to?
All right. So I guess we're going to have to go category by category on this.
All right, let's get nerdy.
So, I already mentioned some of my favorite stuff out of Texas when we were talking about kind of competitor thing and kind of some of the great whiskeys being made here.
Yeah, Red Corn last year by Still Awesome was one of my favorite bottles.
Yeah, it's such a good bottle, man.
Such a good
bottle. And hopefully they got some other cool stuff on that end coming this year.
Yeah.
I'm hoping. And then you've got, going back to, I guess, Kentucky, we'll talk about Kentucky bourbons. There's some really, really fun ones. We talk about everyday stuff. Old Forester 1920, I think is a great everyday bourbon. You can go find it on the shelf. We start talking about Russell's always a great bourbon to find on the shelf.
Those Russell picks, like you can't. I've never found a bad one. Like they're so good.
They do such a great job with it. So I mean, you've got that. I mean, when you start talking, I mean, obviously there's allocated stuff that's delicious. I love Stag. I love ECBPs. Hard to hate on, especially some of the older ones. My brother had a bottle of the Hazmat one that was unbelievable.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I haven't tried that one.
I have a C923. That was kind of the older barrel proof I think I have of theirs.
That's such a good bottle. Really good. Yeah.
And you've got, I mean, obviously you've got some barrel proof of E.H. Taylor. Is hard to beat, especially the rye is so dang good.
Yeah.
Super allocated stuff. I mean, the Booker's rye was an amazing bottle. Super great. Obviously, again, Stag. We could say Stag a couple more times, probably.
Yeah. Hey, we're right there. To me, George C. Stag is like, we call it the perfect bourbon. Like, it's been the best I've ever had. We had the 23, right? I tried the 24 too. I posted a video on our TikTok, social media. I did a blind with William Louis Reller. I did the little whiskey flight at Whiskey Cake. So, but Stag's still been king for me. I haven't had anything that can, at this point, that can compete. Russell's 15 was the closest thing I think so far. Yeah. Which got everyone's bourbon of the year last year. So phenomenal bottle, but yeah.
Shout out to Russell's one more time.
Yeah, I know. No, gobble.
Yeah. And let's see here. I mean, fun stuff like my brother, when he was in college, like his go-to whiskey was always antique 107, which when he was in college was all the gold vein bottles.
Yeah.
And so I remember he still had one bottle left in his cabinet. He's like, yeah, it was $19. We used to go get it because it was high proof.
I love those old labels. I wish they'd bring back the old label.
God, that was and that's such a good bottle. Have you had the Bardstown High Wheat?
I have not had high wheat yet.
Oh, so we did an episode 3 called Weller Killer. Go back and listen to it if you haven't heard it yet. But where we did a side by side, I picked 107, but we got a bottle at the Super Bowl drop that we went to at Black Tie, and that bottle is so good. $50. It can compete with any Weller bottle out there.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Bardstown, some of those Discovery series.
I love Bardstown. That's one of the places I want to visit, which actually kind of goes into my next question. You guys have a really cool tour here. Mm-hmm. What are some of the cooler tour that you've done that out there?
That's hard because typically, and this is me bragging, I don't typically do the normal tours because generally it's like I know a lot of the distillers. Yeah. So usually I'm like, hey, dude, I'm going to be in town. Are you around that day? And generally like, yeah, come in, I'll take you around. And that's generally how I visit places. So I haven't done any formal regular tours in years.
Or just places you visited. There's a lot of awesome history out there.
Texas, Garrison's, it's so beautiful on the Garrison property. That's hard to beat. We were talking earlier today or earlier on the Rye, up in Maryland.
Sagamore.
Thank you. My brain just farted on me there. No, Sagamore.
It's good whiskey.
The tour at Sagamore is great. The tasting room there after the tour, really great experience at Sagamore. Those are some of the ones I've been on recently that really kind of stick out as kind of really cool. I mean, everyone always says that Makers is the best one up in Kentucky as far as experience.
Yeah, it is cool to go and dip your own bottle and stuff.
Unless you get the right tour guide at Buffalo Trace, in which case you're gonna have a pretty good time regardless. So, Freddie is pretty great.
The new Pursuit Spirits is really cool. They let you thieve barrels and stuff.
I haven't gotten a chance to do that yet. So.
I've heard that one's really cool. They want to have a one of kind of experience. So I always think that's really cool when you try to do something different.
Yeah, and their double oak they came out with is one of the best I've had last year. I mean, it's some of the best double oak I've had I think it's on the market. The Pursuit guys, it's very good. So if you haven't tried it, you check it out. We'll have to get back together, man. We got some bottles.
Dude, let's do it.
We'll take you on a whiskey journey, right?
Let's go. Oh yeah.
Do you have any food pairings that you think go really well with your whiskeys?
Ooh, Lord. A little bit different for different ones. So for me, kind of our heavier oak stuff, that's where I typically go to with, steak or any kind of red meats. So when it comes to Icor, it's typically, I'm going to go to something that's really fatty, very heavy, because it helps kind of cut through that. It's really, really kind of funny. That also, some of the cheeses are really, really great with some of the pot still bourbons. Typically, when it comes to the port and cognac there, I typically going to go more towards a little more fruit. I love pairing fruit with fruit. So a lot of berries. Kiwi, it's actually really dang good with kiwi. I know
Oh, that's
interesting.
interesting.
Some
I've
weird things out there.
no one's ever. I absolutely love kiwis.
Yeah, kiwi's good.
I always forget they exist for whatever reason, but every time I go back to kiwi, I'm like, oh my God, I love kiwis. Why don't I eat these more often?
I could do that with a bourbon.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good recommendation.
I got to tell you though, my mom's the better one with that because she'll go through and she has a whole tasting thing that she's done of like common junk foods and what whiskeys to pair with which.
That's cool.
So like fun, like I think Promethean was Funyuns was the really fun one with.
Oh
that.
man, hey, I'm a sucker for. I used to like. I remember riding my bike, going to school. I'd always stop and buy a bag of Funyuns to put on top of my sandwich. So, you put the sandwich and then put the chips
the
in
crunch in
between.
there.
Yeah,
Come on.
Oh man, that takes me back.
So mom's got a bunch of different pairings and stuff that she loves doing. So.
That's cool.
Do you have any cigar recommendations that would go good with your whiskeys?
Man, that's more of a Jonathan question on that. My cigar knowledge is very limited.
Yeah.
I enjoy smoking cigars, but I have decided that like I want to remain a little bit more noobish when it comes to cigars because if I get into cigars, I don't know where my pocketbook's going to go on that one.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's
I know, I can't
overwhelming.
afford that. I already spent enough on
You
whiskey.
walk into those humidors and it's just
Yeah.
overwhelming.
I know my brother loves Atabay cigars with like Harbinger and stuff, but yeah, those are like $50 cigars, and I'm not doing that very often.
That is really expensive.
Yeah.
I got a Weller Cohiba that was 25 the other day. I'm like, whoa, that seems kind of expensive.
Yeah, your
for cigar.
Cohiba too. It was like 25. I think you got.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Oh, I thought.
Oh no,
okay.
no, that wasn't a Weller one.
No, that
the
wasn't.
Weller one was like 30 or something.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we skipped over a question. Why Denison, Texas, for you guys?
Denison has a really deep connection with cognac. So again, my brother and I are taught by a master cognac distiller. We figured if we're going to use cognac techniques, we should be in the town that has that kind of a deep connection with it. And so, I mean, I can get into the full story of why they're sister cities, but the short story is there's a gentleman who lived here in town in the late 1800s. His name was T.V. Munson, who through all this research he did into grapes, discovered a way to really get European grapes to grow really well here in the U.S., which was by grafting on top of American grape roots. And specifically, there's a lot of Texas grape roots that they use for this process. And through that, he was able to get a lot of the French grapes to start growing. So that's why you saw initially a lot of French grapes out in California after phylloxera kind of hit. But he actually was able to help the Europeans because we had bugs that got transferred over from the U.S. to Europe, and they kind of decimated European wine production, specifically phylloxera. It's a little tiny aphid. And so he was able to take these Texas grape roots and take them back over to France, and they would graft their native grapes on top of these grape roots because the grape roots from Texas are really beefy against bugs and drought and some of the diseases. And so they were able to grow a lot of their native varieties still because of the research and what T.V. Munson did. So for that reason, it's the reason why Bordeaux and Burgundy and Cognac and Champagne are all still around is because of this research that he did. And so Denison became sister cities with Cognac. For us, it means that like Mayor from Cognac, a lot of master distillers actually come here every few years. And since they've come here, then they come hang out with us. We taste whiskey in the back. We get them feeling pretty good. And then they invite us to go hang out with them in France. So I've gotten to go over to Cognac and distill over there as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's got to be amazing.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable experience.
I see you guys had a brandy. Do you have a cognac?
Yeah, we do have brandy that we distill.
I don't know the difference. I'm not
So brandy, so cognac's a type of brandy.
Yeah.
So if that makes sense. So when you look at your big categories, whiskeys, grain derived, rum is sugar derived.
Mm-hmm.
Brandy is fruit derived.
Yeah.
So the most common fruit, obviously, for use is going to be grapes. So cognac is a type of grape brandy. Armagnac is to Calvados, another type of French brandy, is actually apple. A little bit of pear in there, but mostly apple derived. So, but yeah, that's kind of the quick and dirty simple.
Do you know a lot about rum? So Foursquare. So I go to Barbados a lot for work, and Foursquare Distillery, which is one of the greatest in the world. They do a Calvados with one of their rums, and it's so good.
Gorgeous.
It's outstanding. I'll have to try to see if I can get a sample or a bottle back because those limited releases they're doing are becoming very hard to find. Especially they're like I went to the distillery last time I was in Barbados in January, and they were all sold out. Yeah. So
doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, they're so good. So.
Do you have a sports team that you guys follow or that you follow?
So I mean, truthfully, the one sports team that I have a lot of allegiance to is going to be the Cardinals out of St. Louis.
Okay.
That was when I was a little kid. One of the teams I first really fell in love with. I was actually born in New Jersey. My brother was born in El Paso. So I went to a few Mets games when I was real little, but then like we lived in Illinois for like a year and a half, and that was like the formative time for me and like becoming a giant fan. And Ozzie Smith was with the Cardinals, so I absolutely fell in love with the Cardinals at that point.
Oh, yeah, Ozzie Smith, great player.
Sounds like you guys have lived in a lot of different places. Is there a place that you've preferred, like that you thought was the best?
Well, I would say that's a tough question. I mean, there's really great things about different places.
Yeah.
I mean, spent most of my life in like elementary school was Corpus, middle school, high school was Amarillo. Undergrad was in Sherman, right next door to here at Austin College.
Yeah, Austin College.
Law school was in St. Louis, and then back here for that. So kind of lived all over the place. Obviously spent time in a lot of different parts of the U.S., but I mean, I think that's one of the things that really has come down to me is like, don't get me wrong, I love mountains. I love beach. I love variety, but I think desert has its own beauty. Like every place can be really beautiful if you take the time to kind of appreciate what's around you.
For sure.
Yeah. You'll have to remind me. I'll have to tell you my Austin College story.
Oh, that's always dangerous.
No, it's not dangerous. Just how circumstances in life put you in a different direction. You know, because what I find unique about your journey and my journey is kind of similar. Like I was pre-med, biology, health science major.
That's why you're looking nice.
And I'm in the call center industry, and you know, we're doing a podcast now, but it's kind of funny, like how your life puts you on a different path, and whether it's the right path or the path you want, it's all about the destination. And you know, we're sitting here drinking amazing whiskey, talking about things that we love and passionate about. I mean, I couldn't think of anything better to do today, you know. So awesome. I mean, you have anything you want to share with our audience on anything you guys up and coming? You got some expansions, which we talked about. Do you have any whiskeys or something that maybe somebody to be look out for?
Ooh, so we've got two kind of really special releases this year that we're doing. We've got one that's coming out in May that's going to be called the Mother of Texas Whiskey Blend, because that's what the distillers call my mom, because she mothered most of them during the course of the last decade.
That's awesome.
But so she sat down with my brother. My brother actually created a blend for that particular whiskey and did a double barrel with it, kind of to fit her personal preferences. So
okay,
that's
cool.
Really fun whiskey that's gonna be coming out kind of in May. That's gonna be kind of easier drinker as we get into summer. Like I typically go to a little bit lower proof bourbon, rather than the 140s, and midsummer tends to be a little bit hot for me,
especially when it's 115 outside and we're all dying down here.
When the temperature's over 100 degrees, my proof is not over 100 degrees.
Yeah, I hear you on that. We were talking about, because we drink whiskey neat in a Glencairn, but in the summer, 1792 Bottle Bond on an ice cube is one of my favorites. Yeah, so definitely understand the proof. Let's relax a little bit.
And then this fall, winter, we've got the 10-year-old Harold is going to be coming out. So it's going to be some really fun older bourbons that go into that guy that we're already toying with the kind of the final blend of that right now. So just seeing where that's going.
That's awesome.
Super excited about that.
Right. Excellent. Well, I mean, again, thank you for meeting with us today and taking the time. If you haven't tried Ironroot, you haven't come down to the tour, come down. Great. Whole family's involved and engaged in what you guys are trying to do. You guys are making some amazing whiskey. I'm excited to see what a new bottles. So keep us posted, and would love to talk about and share. And you guys are a force to be reckoned with, some of the big dogs in Texas. So keep doing what you're doing,
man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, everything's really good. I mean, I haven't had many bad whiskeys, but I definitely haven't had any from Ironroot. It's always so good.
Yeah,
and just different things, and they each have their own, personalities. Mm-hmm. So that's really, it's really cool when you drink whiskey. You want, different complexities and stuff that's evolving. So it's really good, and I'm really enjoying. I'm excited for the future of it. So
yep, for sure. So you got anything else to close us out?
Yeah, I mean, other than that, man, just go out there, enjoy a little whiskey. Variety can be the spice of life. Mm-hmm. Test out new things you never tried before. Try all sorts of different stuff, because you'll never know what kind of cool, crazy thing you're going to find.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait to start blinding some of their stuff. We need to start mixing them in some of the blinds we're doing.
Yeah, sure.
So it'll be good. All right. Well, I'm Cody.
I'm Garrett.
And we are the Bourbon Nerdz. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you soon.
Yep.
Take care. Bye-bye. Do you believe in Bigfoot?
Do I believe in Bigfoot? I will say that I'm skeptical